Merchon. My name is Nicolas, and I just turned 62 years old last month. For 35 years, I believed my son Jason and I had an unbreakable bond until the day he chose his wife's birthday celebration over his own mother's funeral. The pain cut deeper than anything I had ever experienced. Now, after 2 years of silence, he showed up at my doorstep with a request so unexpected it left me speechless. Life has a way of bringing things full circle when you least expect it. Let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to make difficult choices about forgiveness. The journey I'm about to share might help you with your own path forward. I spent 40 years of my life in construction, building homes for other families, while making sure my own had everything they needed. Not luxuries, mind you, but a solid roof over their heads, food on the table, and the security of knowing tomorrow would be taken care of. My hands grew calloused, and my back permanently sore, but I wore these marks with pride because they were evidence of my commitment to Margaret and Jason. Margaret was the love of my life for 35 beautiful years. We met at a county fair in 1986 when I accidentally spilled lemonade on her white summer dress. Instead of getting angry, she laughed and said it was too hot anyway. That was Margaret for you, always finding the silver lining. She worked as a kindergarten teacher until she retired, bringing the same warmth and patience she showed those 5-year-olds home to us every evening. Our son Jason was born in 1991 after we had nearly given up hope of having children. The doctors had told us our chances were slim, which made his arrival feel like nothing short of a miracle. From the moment I held him, I promised myself I would give him opportunities I never had. Jason was a bright kid from the start. By 3rd grade, his teachers were already telling us he had a gift for mathematics and logical thinking. Margaret and I would sit at the kitchen table helping him with homework, though by middle school he was explaining concepts to us instead. I still remember how his eyes would light up when he solved a particularly challenging problem. Our modest 3-bedroom home in suburban Pennsylvania became the center of our world. The kitchen, with its outdated oak cabinets and laminate countertops, was where we gathered every evening for dinner. No exceptions. Margaret insisted that family meals were sacred, a time to reconnect and share our days. The living room, with its worn but comfortable couch, was where we watched movies on Friday nights, a tradition we maintained even through Jason's teenage years, when most kids his age were out with friends. In the backyard, I built a treehouse when Jason was 7. It took me 3 weekends working after long shifts at construction sites. The look on his face when he climbed up there for the first time made every splinter and sore muscle worth it. As he grew older, that treehouse became his thinking spot, where he would go to read or work out difficult homework problems. To put Jason through college, I took on extra shifts and weekend work. There were months when I would leave before sunrise and return after Margaret and Jason were already asleep. My body protested, especially my lower back, but I pushed through. Margaret picked up substitute teaching to help with the expenses. We were determined that our son would graduate without the burden of student loans. When Jason received his acceptance letter from Carnegie Mellon University, I think I cried harder than he did. The scholarship covered most of his tuition, but we still needed to provide for living expenses and books. Margaret and I exchanged glances, silently communicating our shared resolve. We would find a way. For 4 years, we drove the 4-hour round trip to visit him once a month, always bringing home cooked meals that would last him a week. Margaret would spend days preparing his favorites: meatloaf, lasagna, chicken pot pie, all carefully stored in containers labeled with heating instructions. Jason always seemed genuinely happy to see us introducing us to his friends and showing us around campus with pride. The day Jason graduated with honors in computer engineering was perhaps the proudest moment of my life. Watching him walk across that stage in his cap and gown, I felt a sense of accomplishment that made all those years of sacrifice feel insignificant in comparison. Margaret squeezed my hand, tears streaming down her face as we watched our boy become the first college graduate in either of our families. After graduation, Jason landed a job at a tech company in Pittsburgh. The starting salary was more than Margaret and I had ever made combined. I remember Jason showing us the offer letter, and while I felt a twinge of something, not quite jealousy, but perhaps a sense of my own limitations, it was overwhelmed by immense pride. This was exactly what we had worked for. For the first couple of years after college, Jason would come home at least once a month. We maintained our family traditions: Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, even the occasional fishing trip that had been a staple of his childhood. Margaret kept his room exactly as he had left it, complete with science fair trophies and computer programming books lining the shelves. In those early years of his career, Jason would call us several times a week, eager to share his successes and frustrations. Margaret always had the perfect words of encouragement, while I offered practical advice when I could, though his world of software engineering was largely foreign to me. Still, we connected through the universal language of hard work and determination values I had worked to instill in him from an early age. Those were good years, simple but fulfilling. I had no idea how dramatically things would change when Jason met Sophia. Jason met Sophia at a tech conference in San Francisco. He had been sent by his company to represent them, and Sophia was there with her father's investment firm, scouting for promising startups. When Jason first mentioned her on the phone, I could hear the change in his voice, a mixture of excitement and nervousness I had not heard since he was a teenager. 3 months later, he announced he wanted to bring her home to meet us. Margaret spent 2 days cleaning the house, even though it was already spotless. She prepared her special pot roast and baked an apple pie from scratch using her mother's recipe. I made sure the lawn was perfectly manicured and even repainted the front door to make a good impression. When they arrived, I was immediately struck by Sophia's appearance. She was undeniably beautiful, tall and slender with perfectly styled dark hair and clothes that looked like they belonged in a magazine. But what I noticed most was how she surveyed our home as she entered, her eyes cataloging everything with a barely concealed look of assessment. "Your home is so quaint," she said, running a manicured finger along our dining room table, the same solid oak table where we had shared thousands of family meals. "It must be nice to live so simply." I felt Margaret stiffen beside me, but she quickly recovered and offered Sophia a warm smile. "We find joy in the simple things," she replied, her teacher's diplomacy kicking in. Throughout dinner, Sophia dominated the conversation, with stories about her family's vacation home in the Hamptons, her father's investment portfolio, and her own job at her father's firm. She asked few questions about us, and when Jason tried to share childhood memories, she would skillfully redirect the conversation back to herself. "Jason tells me you were a construction worker, Nicolas," Sophia asked during dessert, her tone making my career sound like a curious oddity. "Still am," I corrected her gently. 40 years in the business, helped build half the subdivisions in this county." "How fascinating," she replied, though her eyes had already moved on to something else. "I suppose there will always be a need for manual labor." Jason, I noticed, said nothing to defend my career. Instead, he looked almost embarrassed, quickly changing the subject to his recent promotion. They stayed for just one night, though they had originally planned to spend the weekend. Sophia claimed an urgent work matter required their early return to Pittsburgh. As they left, Margaret hugged Jason tightly, whispering something in his ear that made him look momentarily ashamed. "What did you say to him?" I asked after they drove away. "Just that we miss him," she answered, but I could see the worry in her eyes. 6 months later, Jason called to tell us he and Sophia were engaged. The wedding was scheduled for the following spring at an exclusive resort in the Poconos, selected and largely planned by Sophia's parents. When we offered to contribute financially, Jason awkwardly explained that Sophia's father had insisted on covering everything. "It's going to be quite elaborate," he explained. "Mr. Patterson has a certain image to maintain." The wedding was unlike anything Margaret and I had ever experienced. 300 guests, many of whom Jason had never met before. Ice sculptures, a 10-piece orchestra, and a meal that cost more per plate than our weekly grocery budget. Margaret and I felt distinctly out of place in our Sunday best, which paled in comparison to the designer outfits surrounding us. During the reception, I barely had a chance to speak with my son. When I finally cornered him near the bar, his eyes kept darting around the room as if looking for an escape. "I am proud of you, son," I said, trying to connect. "Your mother and I just want you to be happy." "Thanks, Dad," he replied, offering a quick, distracted smile. "Sophia's father is waving me over. We will catch up soon, okay?" But soon stretched into weeks, then months. The weekly phone calls became monthly, then sporadic. Invitations to visit were met with excuses about work demands and social obligations. When they did visit, it was rarely for more than a few hours, with Sophia constantly checking her watch or phone. Margaret tried to maintain the connection, sending care packages and handwritten letters. She would spend hours selecting thoughtful gifts for their birthdays and anniversaries. Jason's thank you calls grew shorter, sometimes replaced by hasty text messages that felt like obligatory responses rather than genuine gratitude. "He is just busy establishing himself," Margaret would say, making excuses for his growing distance. "Remember how hard you worked at his age." But I knew it was different. I had always made time for family, no matter how demanding work became. Still, I kept my concerns to myself, not wanting to add to Margaret's worry. The changes in Jason became more pronounced with each visit. His clothes were now exclusively designer brands. He drove a luxury car that cost more than our house. His conversation was peppered with references to exclusive restaurants, high-end golf clubs, and the influential people he and Sophia socialized with. One Thanksgiving 2 years after the wedding, Jason and Sophia arrived 3 hours late for dinner. Margaret had kept everything warm repeatedly, assuring me that they must have been delayed by traffic. When they finally arrived, Sophia barely touched the food Margaret had spent 2 days preparing. "I am mostly vegan now," she explained, picking at the green beans. "Except when we are at Nobu or Le Bernardin, of course." Jason ate heartily, but spoke little about his life. When I asked direct questions about his work or their new home, he gave vague, abbreviated answers. Margaret valiantly kept the conversation flowing, asking about Sophia's family and their upcoming holiday plans. "Actually," Jason said, looking uncomfortable, "we will be spending Christmas in Aspen with the Pattersons this year. Their chalet has the most amazing views of the mountains." I saw the hurt flash across Margaret's face before she composed herself. Christmas had always been our most treasured family tradition. "Perhaps we could celebrate early," she suggested. "We could do our gift exchange the weekend before." "We will have to see," Sophia interjected smoothly. "December is so busy with all the charity galas and corporate events. I will have my assistant check our calendar." They left immediately after dessert, declining coffee with excuses about the long drive back. As their taillights disappeared down our street, Margaret stood at the window long after they were gone. "He will find his way back to us," she said softly, though I was not sure if she was trying to convince me or herself. For the next 2 years, we saw Jason only a handful of times. He missed my 60th birthday celebration, sending an expensive watch instead, with a card signed by both him and Sophia. He called on holidays and occasionally on random weeknights, but the conversations felt scripted and distant. Margaret continued her efforts to bridge the growing gap. She maintained Jason's childhood room, updated the family photo albums, and spoke of him as if he might walk through the door at any moment. I sometimes caught her looking at old photographs, tracing his face with her finger, a wistful smile playing on her lips. "He is still our boy," she would say, whenever I expressed frustration at his absence. "No matter how far he goes, he will always find his way home." I wished I could share her unwavering faith. Instead, I channeled my disappointment into projects around the house, rebuilding the back deck, installing new cabinets in the kitchen. Improvements I knew Margaret had always wanted, but we had postponed due to cost. It was my way of showing her that we could be happy with just the two of us, that our life together was still full and meaningful, even if our son had chosen a different path. Little did I know how precious those final months with just the two of us would become. The diagnosis came on an ordinary Tuesday in April. Margaret had been experiencing a persistent cough for several weeks, which we both attributed to seasonal allergies. When she began having chest pain and shortness of breath, I finally convinced her to see our family doctor. Dr. Williams ordered a chest X-ray, then a CT scan. 2 days later, we sat in his office as he gently explained that Margaret had stage 4 lung cancer. It had already spread to her lymph nodes and liver. His words seemed to come from far away as I gripped Margaret's hand, feeling the ground shift beneath me. "How long?" Margaret asked, her voice steady, even as tears filled her eyes. "Without treatment, perhaps 3 to 4 months. Dr. Williams replied. "With aggressive chemotherapy, we might extend that to 6 or 8 months, but the quality of life factors need to be considered." Margaret nodded, absorbing this information with the same quiet dignity she had shown throughout our life together. I, on the other hand, felt like I was drowning, unable to process the idea of a world without her in it. That evening, after we returned home, Margaret sat me down at our kitchen table. "I want to fight this," she said firmly. "Not because I think we can beat it, but because I want whatever time I have left with you. But Nicolas, I need you to promise me something." "Anything," I said, my voice breaking. "When I am gone, do not let bitterness consume you, especially toward Jason. He will need you more than ever, even if he does not realize it yet." I nodded, unable to speak through the knot in my throat. At that moment, I would have promised her the moon and stars if she had asked. I called Jason that night and told him about the diagnosis. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" he finally asked. "Could they have made a mistake? 3 doctors confirmed it." I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "She is starting chemotherapy next week. She would really like to see you, son." "Of course," he said quickly. "Let me check with Sophia about our schedule. We have the charity gala this weekend, and then the Hamptons the next, but maybe the weekend after." I cut him off, a rare flash of anger breaking through my shock. "Your mother has terminal cancer, Jason. She might not have many weekends left." Another silence then. "I will see what I can do, Dad." He visited once 3 weeks later. By then, the chemotherapy had already taken its toll. Margaret's thick brown hair had begun to fall out, and she had lost weight from the constant nausea. Still, she lit up when Jason walked through the door, embracing him with what strength she had left. He stayed for just under 2 hours. Sophia had remained in Pittsburgh with what Jason described as a prior commitment. He seemed uncomfortable in the presence of his mother's illness, his eyes darting away from her IV port, his conversation carefully avoiding any mention of the future. Before he left, Margaret asked for a private moment with him. They spoke in her bedroom for about 15 minutes. When they emerged, Jason's eyes were red, but he offered no explanation for their conversation. He promised to visit again soon, but I could see in Margaret's eyes that she knew better. As the weeks passed, Margaret's condition deteriorated rapidly. The chemotherapy was taking more from her than it was giving back. After 2 months, she decided to stop treatment and begin hospice care at home. "I want to spend my remaining time really living, not just fighting to live," she explained to the doctors, to me, and over the phone to Jason, who called more frequently now, but still did not visit. I took a leave of absence from work to care for her full time. Our days fell into a gentle rhythm. Mornings were typically her best time, when she had enough energy to sit on the porch swing and watch the neighborhood come to life. I would bring her tea and toast, and we would talk about everything and nothing. Memories from our early years together, the changing seasons, the family of cardinals that had nested in our maple tree. By afternoon, fatigue would overtake her, and she would rest while I caught up on household chores or prepared meals for the days ahead. In the evenings, if she felt strong enough, we would watch old movies, or I would read to her from her favorite books. More often, though, I would simply hold her hand as she drifted in and out of sleep, her breathing becoming more labored with each passing day. Through it all, Margaret remained concerned about Jason, asking after each of his phone calls whether I thought he sounded well, whether he was taking care of himself. "He sounds busy." I would answer, unable to tell her how brief and superficial these conversations had become. "Promise me you will look after him when I am gone," she would say. "He might seem independent, but he will need his father." I promised, though privately I wondered if Jason needed either of us anymore. As May turned to June and June to July, Margaret grew weaker. The hospice nurse increased her pain medication, and lucid moments became precious rarities. During one such moment, about a week before she passed, Margaret beckoned me closer to her bed. "I have had such a beautiful life with you, Nicolas," she whispered, her voice threadbare but determined. "I would not change a single day. Not even the day I spilled lemonade on your dress?" I asked, trying to smile through my tears. "Especially not that day," she replied, her eyes crinkling at the corners. On her final night, I sat beside her bed, holding her increasingly cold hand. The hospice nurse had warned me it would not be long. Margaret had been unresponsive for most of the day, but as midnight approached, her eyes suddenly opened, finding mine with startling clarity. "Take care of our boy," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "And Nicolas, be happy again. Promise me." "I promise," I whispered, bringing her hand to my lips. She smiled, closed her eyes, and took one final gentle breath. Just like that, my partner of 35 years was gone, leaving a void I could not begin to comprehend. The next morning, I called Jason. His phone went to voicemail twice before he finally answered, sounding distracted. "Dad, sorry I was in a meeting. Is everything okay?" "Your mother passed away last night." I said the words, feeling strange and hollow in my mouth. There was silence, then a sharp intake of breath. I did not think it would be so soon. The doctors said she might have until fall." "She went peacefully," I said, unable to offer him more comfort than that. "I need to make arrangements for the funeral. Can you come home?" "Yes, of course," he replied quickly. "Just tell me when." I set the funeral for the following Saturday, giving out-of-town relatives time to make arrangements. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and visits from well-meaning neighbors bearing casseroles and condolences. Through it all, I moved as if underwater, going through the motions of life, while feeling nothing but the crushing weight of Margaret's absence. Jason called on Thursday evening, 2 days before the funeral. I felt a momentary surge of relief that he was checking in, perhaps offering to come early to help with the final arrangements. "Dad, I have a problem," he began, his voice tight with what sounded like embarrassment. I am not going to be able to make it on Saturday. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. What do you mean? It is your mother's funeral, Jason. I know, and I feel terrible, but it is Sophia's 30th birthday on Saturday. We have had this party planned for months. Over 100 guests, deposits paid, everything arranged. I cannot cancel it now. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, the phone pressed so tightly to my ear it hurt. You are choosing your wife's birthday party over your mother's funeral. It is not like that, he protested weakly. You do not understand the position I am in. Sophia's father has business associates flying in from overseas. Her family would never forgive me if I ruined this. And what about your family? Jason. What about forgiveness for missing the chance to say goodbye to the woman who raised you, who loved you unconditionally? Dad, please try to understand, he pleaded. I will come next week. We can have a private memorial, just the two of us. I found I had nothing left to say to my son. The pain of Margaret's loss was suddenly compounded by this betrayal, creating an ache so profound I could barely breathe through it. Goodbye, Jason, I said finally, and hung up the phone. The funeral took place on a beautiful July morning. The church was filled with Margaret's former students, now adults with children of their own colleagues, from her years of teaching neighbors and family. Everyone commented on what a wonderful woman she had been, how many lives she had touched, what a terrible loss her passing represented. And everyone asked about Jason. He must be devastated, they would say. Where is he sitting? I created a fiction about an unavoidable work emergency, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Some nodded sympathetically. Others looked confused or skeptical. Margaret's sister Patricia fixed me with a knowing look, but said nothing, simply squeezing my hand in silent support. Standing beside Margaret's casket, delivering the eulogy we should have shared, I felt more alone than I had ever been. The physical absence of my son created a vacuum beside me that seemed to pull at my insides, hollowing me out. I spoke of Margaret's kindness, her patience, her unwavering love for her family and her students. I did not mention that the family she had loved so dearly was now represented by only half its members. After the service, after the burial, after the reception, at the house where well-meaning friends had arranged trays of sandwiches and cookies that I could not bring myself to eat, I finally returned home alone. The house was quiet in a way it had never been before. Not just the absence of sound, but the absence of potential for sound. Margaret would never again call my name from upstairs, never again hum in the kitchen as she prepared dinner, never again laugh at my attempts to fix the perpetually dripping bathroom faucet. And now it seemed Jason would never again fill this house with his presence either. I sat in Margaret's favorite armchair, still indented with the shape of her body, and for the first time since her diagnosis, I allowed myself to really cry. For my lost wife, for my lost son, and for the family that had slipped through my fingers like water. The first year after Margaret's death passed in a fog of grief and loneliness. I returned to work after a month, needing the physical exhaustion to help me sleep at night. My coworkers were kind but awkward around me, unsure how to address the obvious pain I carried. I preferred it that way. Their discomfort kept conversations brief and practical, allowing me to focus on the job rather than my emotions. I did not call Jason after the funeral, and he did not call me. The chasm between us felt too wide to bridge with mere words. On Christmas, I received a gift basket from an expensive gourmet shop with a card signed by both Jason and Sophia. The impersonal nature of it, clearly selected and sent by an assistant, only deepened my sense of loss. As winter gave way to spring, I found myself increasingly restless in the house that now felt too large for just one person. Every room held memories of Margaret, but also painful reminders of Jason's childhood. Trophies, photographs, marks on the doorframe tracking his growth. One weekend in April, I began packing away some of these reminders, not discarding them, but placing them carefully in storage bins that I moved to the attic. It felt like a necessary step toward whatever came next. Frank Bennett, my next-door neighbor of 20 years, became an unexpected source of support. His wife had died of breast cancer 5 years earlier, and he understood the particular loneliness of losing a spouse better than most. He began inviting me for weekly poker games with some other retirees and widowers in the neighborhood. At first, I went merely to escape the silence of my house, but gradually I found myself looking forward to these gatherings. Grief does not have a timeline, Frank told me one evening as we sat on his back deck with beers. But eventually, it makes room for other things. Not because you forget, but because you learn to carry it differently. His words stayed with me, offering a framework for understanding the subtle shifts in my pain. Not diminishing exactly, but changing form, becoming something I could live alongside rather than something that threatened to consume me. By the second year, I had established new routines. I joined a woodworking class at the community center, rediscovering a skill I had enjoyed in my youth, but had abandoned due to the demands of work and family. I began volunteering at the local elementary school, where Margaret had taught reading to kindergartners once a week. Their unfiltered enthusiasm and curiosity reminded me of her approach to teaching and to life. I also started the process of simplifying my living situation. The 4-bedroom colonial where we had raised Jason now felt excessive and somewhat burdensome. I began donating furniture we had kept, just in case, and books we had already read. I repainted walls, fixed long-ignored maintenance issues, and generally prepared the house for whatever might come next, though I was not yet ready to consider selling it. Throughout this time, I thought of Jason often, especially on birthdays and holidays. I wondered if he ever drove by the house when he was in town visiting Sophia's family. I wondered if he regretted his choice or if he had justified it so thoroughly in his mind that it no longer troubled him. Sometimes in weak moments I would pick up the phone dial half his number, then set it down again, unsure what I would even say if he answered. Frank encouraged me to reach out. "Life is too short for unresolved relationships," he would say. But something held me back. Not just pride or anger, but a deeper fear that the son I had known and loved was truly gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized or understood. In July, on the 2nd anniversary of Margaret's death, I visited her grave alone. I brought fresh flowers, yellow daisies her favorite, and spent an hour talking to her as if she could hear me. I told her about my woodworking projects, about the kindergartners, who reminded me of her, about the cardinal family that had returned to nest in our maple tree. "I am trying to keep my promise," I said finally. "I am finding ways to be happy again, but I have not been able to keep my promise about Jason. I do not know how to reach him anymore, Margaret. I do not know if he even wants to be reached." As I drove home, I felt a curious sense of lightness, as if sharing these thoughts with Margaret, even if only symbolically, had released something within me. For the first time in 2 years, I felt truly ready to move forward, to create a life that honored Margaret's memory without being trapped in the past. I spent the rest of that day cleaning out the garage, a task I had been avoiding for months. By evening, I had filled my truck with items for donation and created a more functional workspace for my growing collection of woodworking tools. It was while sweeping the now cleared floor that I heard a car pull into my driveway. Through the garage windows, I saw a vehicle I did not recognize. Not the luxury car Jason had driven during his last visit, but an older model sedan. For a moment, I thought it might be a neighbor, or perhaps someone who had taken a wrong turn. Then the driver's door opened, and my son stepped out. Jason looked nothing like the polished, confident man who had last stood in my driveway. His hair was longer unkempt. He had lost weight, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He wore jeans and a plain t-shirt, a stark contrast to the designer clothes that had become his uniform in recent years. I set my broom against the wall and stepped out of the garage, my heart hammering in my chest. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other across the driveway, the weight of 2 years of silence hanging between us. "Dad," he finally said, his voice rough. "I was not sure you would be home." "Where else would I be?" I replied immediately, regretting the defensive tone. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the house behind me. "Can we talk inside, maybe?" I nodded and led him through the side door into the kitchen. The space had changed since his last visit. New cabinets, new countertops, Margaret's collection of decorative plates removed from the walls. Jason's eyes tracked these differences, a flash of confusion crossing his face. "Would you like some water coffee?" I offered, falling back on basic hospitality because I did not know what else to do. "Water would be good, thanks." I filled 2 glasses and set them on the kitchen table, the same oak table that had been the center of our family life for decades. Jason sat down, his movements hesitant, almost apologetic. "You have changed things," he observed, looking around. "Yes," I replied simply. "Some things needed changing." He nodded, tracing a finger along a water ring on the table, a mark that had been there since his high school graduation party. "I should have called first. I was not sure what to say." 2 years is a long time, Jason." "I know." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "I know it is." I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. Whatever had brought him here after all this time, I needed him to be the one to say it. "Sophia left me," he finally said, the words coming out in a rush. 3 months ago. She filed for divorce last week." This was not what I had expected. Despite everything, Jason and Sophia had seemed to have a solid, if materialistic, partnership. "I am sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "What happened?" He let out a bitter laugh that held no humor. "My company failed. Turns out Sophia was more in love with my potential success than with me." He took a sip of water, his hand trembling slightly. "We launched a software platform last year. My design, my code. Had major investors, including her father. It looked promising until we discovered security vulnerabilities right before launch. I wanted to delay, fix the issues. Her father pushed to launch anyway." "And you stood your ground," I guessed. Jason nodded. "For once, yes. I refused to put my name on something that could compromise users' data. We lost the investors, had to lay off the team. I have been trying to rebuild, but..." He trailed off, staring into his water glass. "That cannot have been easy." I offered, finding myself oddly proud of his ethical stance despite everything else. "It gets worse," he continued, his voice dropping. 2 weeks after I moved out, I found out Sophia had been having an affair with my business partner, Thomas, for over a year. They are together now, and her father is funding Thomas's new startup. He looked up, his eyes hollow. "Everything I built, everything I thought I had, it was all just an illusion." I felt a complicated mix of emotions: sympathy for my son's pain, a twinge of vindication that the life he had chosen over us had proven hollow, and deep sadness that he had to learn such a harsh lesson. "I am truly sorry, Jason," I said, meaning it despite everything. He nodded, then straightened his shoulders slightly. "But that is not why I came here today, or not the only reason." "Why did you come?" "I came to apologize," he said, his voice catching. "For missing Mom's funeral. For choosing Sophia's birthday over saying goodbye to the woman who gave me everything. For all the years I took you both for granted while I chased success and status and..." He broke off, fighting for composure. There is no excuse. None. It was the worst mistake of my life, and I have had 2 years of knowing I cannot fix it, cannot take it back. I felt something crack open inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it. Your mother knew you loved her, I said quietly. Even at the end, she defended you, worried about you. She was always better than I deserved. Jason whispered, tears finally spilling over. Both of you were. We sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound Jason's occasional sniff as he tried to regain control. Finally, he took a deep breath and met my eyes again. Dad, I have a request. It feels impossible to ask after everything, but I do not have anywhere else to go. He gestured vaguely toward the window where his car was visible in the driveway. That is all I have left. The house, the savings, most of our assets were in Sophia's name or tied to the company. I have been staying in a motel, but I cannot afford it much longer. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Sympathy, wariness, a protective instinct to help my child, and lingering anger over his past choices. You want to move back home, I stated, making it clear I understood what he was asking. He nodded, looking both desperate and ashamed. Just until I can get back on my feet. I have some job prospects, but nothing solid yet. I would help around the house, pay what I can for expenses. He swallowed hard. I know I have no right to ask, especially after everything. I will understand if you say no. I looked at my son, really looked at him. Beyond the physical changes, I could see that something fundamental had shifted. The entitled status, conscious young man who had dismissed our simple life was gone, replaced by someone humbled, perhaps even broken. In his eyes, I saw not just desperation, but genuine remorse. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, the part that would always be a father first, that would always want to protect my child no matter what. But another part needed more, needed to be sure this was not just about convenience or financial necessity. Why here, Jason? You have friends, former colleagues. Surely someone else could offer you a couch until you find your feet. He looked away, his jaw working. Because I need to make things right. Not just because I need a place to stay, but because I need my dad. His voice broke on the last word, and suddenly he was crying in earnest, shoulders shaking with the force of it. I have lost everything that I thought mattered, only to realize that what really mattered, you and Mom, I threw away years ago. And now she is gone, and I cannot tell her I am sorry, I cannot make it right with her. But maybe I can try to make it right with you, if you will let me. I felt my own eyes fill with tears. In that moment, I heard Margaret's voice as clearly as if she were sitting beside me. Take care of our boy. I reached across the table and placed my hand over my son's. It will not be easy, I said softly. There is a lot of hurt between us. I know. He nodded, turning his hand to grip mine. I know that. If you stay, I continued, there will be conditions. You will need to find work, contribute to the household, rebuild not just your life but our relationship. It will take time and effort from both of us. Hope flickered in his eyes. Shouts. Does that mean yes? I took a deep breath, knowing this decision would change everything. It means we can try. For the first time since he arrived, Jason smiled. A small, tentative smile that reminded me of when he was a child, unsure if he was in trouble or forgiven. Thank you, he whispered. I promise I will not let you down again. I nodded, not quite ready to offer more reassurance than that. You can bring your things in tomorrow. For tonight, your old room is still there, though I have packed away most of your childhood things. That is more than fair, he said quickly. More than I deserve. As he stood to retrieve an overnight bag from his car, I remained at the kitchen table overwhelmed by the sudden turn my carefully reconstructed life had taken. I was not naive enough to believe this would be simple or that trust could be rebuilt overnight. But as I watched my son walk back to the house that had once been his home, I felt something I had not expected, a tentative sense of hope. Margaret had been right, as she so often was. Jason had found his way home, though, by a path neither of us could have anticipated. Whether he would stay, whether we could heal the wounds between us, those questions remained to be answered. But for the first time in 2 years, I allowed myself to imagine a future where our broken family might find a new kind of wholeness. That night before going to bed, I stopped outside the door of Jason's old room. Through the partially open door, I could see him sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a framed photograph of the three of us, one of the few I had left on display. His shoulders were shaking silently. I chose not to enter to give him this private moment with his grief and regret. Instead, I went to my own room and sat on the edge of the bed Margaret and I had shared for decades. "He is home, Margaret," I whispered into the darkness. "I do not know if I am doing the right thing, but I am trying to keep my promise to you. Help me find a way to forgive him. Help me be the father he needs now." And somewhere in the quiet house I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Not an answer exactly, but perhaps permission to find my way forward one day at a time. The first weeks of Jason's return were awkward and tense. We moved around each other carefully, like dancers, unsure of the steps, afraid of toes being stepped on. Conversation was limited to practicalities: mealtimes, household chores, job applications. At night, we retreated to separate rooms, the silence between us filled with all the words we were not yet ready to say. I established clear expectations from the start. Jason would need to find work, any work, while he rebuilt his career. He would contribute to household expenses once he was earning, and he would need to participate fully in maintaining the house, no more being waited on as he had been in his previous life. To his credit, Jason accepted these terms without complaint. He applied for jobs relentlessly, everything from software development positions to retail work. His expensive education and previous success meant nothing now. He was starting over completely. "I had 3 interviews this week," he told me one evening as we ate dinner. "One for a junior developer position, one at the electronics store at the mall, and one at the coffee shop near the community college." I nodded, noticing the humility it must have taken for someone who had once run his own company to apply for entry-level positions. "Any promising leads?" The coffee shop seemed interested. "Not exactly what I trained for, but—" He shrugged. "Honest work is honest work." I felt a surge of pride at his words. Perhaps the first uncomplicated positive emotion I had felt toward my son in years. "Your grandfather used to say that," I remarked. "Any job worth doing is worth doing well." Jason looked up surprised. "I remember. He would say that whenever I complained about mowing the lawn or taking out the trash." A small smile crossed his face. "I guess some lessons stick with you even when you think you have outgrown them." It was a small moment of connection, but it felt significant. A tiny bridge across the chasm between us. As the weeks passed, these moments began to accumulate. Jason found work at both the coffee shop and the electronics store, working split shifts and weekends to make ends meet. I would see him leave before dawn for the opening shift at the cafe, then return home just long enough to shower before heading to his evening shift, selling computers and phones to people who had once been his peers. He never complained, though I could see the toll the physical work took on him. The soreness in his shoulders from hours of making lattes, the mental exhaustion of explaining technology to difficult customers. This was a side of life he had never experienced, having gone straight from college to a comfortable office job. One evening, about 2 months after his return, I found him at the kitchen table, surrounded by paper, a calculator in hand. "Budget planning," he explained when I inquired. "I should be able to start contributing to the household expenses next month. It will not be much at first, but—" "You are doing fine," I assured him, surprised by my own words. "One step at a time." He looked up, gratitude evident in his expression. "I never understood before," he said quietly. "All those years you worked multiple jobs, all the sacrifices you and Mom made. I took it for granted." I sat down across from him. "We wanted to give you opportunities we never had. That was our choice. But I squandered it," he replied, shaking his head. "Chased the wrong things, valued the wrong people." "You are still young," I reminded him. "Plenty of time to get it right." 3 months into our new arrangement, on a rare day when we were both home, I suggested we visit Margaret's grave together. Jason paled at the suggestion, but nodded his agreement. The drive to the cemetery was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. At the gravesite, I hung back, allowing Jason a private moment with his mother. He knelt beside the headstone, tracing her name with his finger, just as Margaret had once traced his face in old photographs. I could not hear what he whispered, but I saw his shoulders shake with silent sobs. When he finally stood and turned to me, his face was tear-streaked, but somehow lighter, as if some burden had been partially lifted. "I told her I was sorry," he said simply, "and that I am trying to be the son she always believed I could be." On the drive home, something shifted between us. Jason began to talk, really talk, about his marriage to Sophia, about how he had gradually lost himself in her world, how her approval and her father's connections had become a drug he could not resist. "I knew they looked down on you and Mom," he admitted, staring out the car window. "I should have defended you, should have been proud of where I came from. Instead, I was embarrassed. I tried to erase my past, to fit into their world." "And now?" I asked. "Now I would give anything to have those years back. To have introduced Sophia to the real me. The kid who helped you build birdhouses in the garage, who treasured Mom's chocolate chip cookies more than any fancy restaurant meal." That evening we shared a beer on the back porch, watching the sunset in a companionable silence that felt for the first time comfortable rather than strained. As fall turned to winter, our lives settled into a new rhythm. Jason secured a more stable position as an IT support specialist at a local community college, not the prestigious tech career he had once had, but work that suited his skills and provided steady income. He continued living with me, contributing to expenses and taking on an increasing share of household maintenance. On Sundays, we established a new tradition of working on home improvement projects together. I taught him the skills I had developed over decades in construction: how to replace a leaky faucet, rewire a light fixture, repair drywall. His software engineer's mind appreciated the logical step-by-step nature of these tasks, and I found I enjoyed sharing my knowledge with someone who valued it. During these projects, we talked about Margaret, about Jason's failed marriage and business, about my own adjustment to life without my partner of 35 years. Gradually, the walls between us came down brick by carefully removed brick. I miss her every day. I confessed one afternoon as we painted the living room a warm sage green that Margaret had always wanted. Sometimes I still turn to tell her something before remembering she is not there. Jason nodded carefully, cutting in along the ceiling. "I dream about her sometimes. She is always disappointed in me, always turning away." "That is not who she was," I said gently. She never gave up on you, never stopped believing you would find your way back to what matters. I wish I had realized that sooner, he replied quietly. As Christmas approached, the third since Margaret's passing, Jason asked if we could revive some of our old family traditions. We bought a tree together and unpacked the ornaments Margaret had carefully stored each year, many of them handmade by Jason in elementary school. We hung lights outside the house and set up the nativity scene Margaret had inherited from her grandmother. On Christmas Eve, we attended the candlelight service at our old church, sitting in the same pew where the three of us had sat for so many years. As the congregation sang Silent Night, I felt Jason's shoulder shake against mine, and without looking, I reached over and took his hand, just as I had when he was a child, afraid of the dark. In January, I made a decision that had been forming in my mind for months. Over dinner one evening, I shared it with Jason. I have been thinking about downsizing, I explained. This house is too big for just me, and eventually you will want your own place again. Jason looked stricken. Are you asking me to move out? Because I can start looking for an apartment right away if… No, I interrupted. That is not what I am saying at all. I am thinking about selling this house and buying something smaller. Maybe a 2-bedroom condo in that new development by the lake. Less maintenance, less space to rattle around in. Oh. He considered this. That makes sense. Have you looked at any places yet? A few. I hesitated, then decided to lay all my cards on the table. Actually, I have been thinking about something else too. I have some savings. Not a fortune, but enough. I thought perhaps I could help you with a down payment on a small place of your own. Something close by so we could still see each other regularly, but giving you a fresh start. Jason's fork clattered to his plate. Dad, I cannot accept that. Not after everything. That is your retirement money. It is my money to use as I see fit, I replied firmly. And investing in my son's future seems like a good use of it. Besides, Margaret would have wanted it this way. I do not know what to say, Jason whispered, clearly overwhelmed. You do not have to decide now, I assured him. Just think about it. Over the next few months, we explored options together. I found a comfortable 2-bedroom condo with a small workshop space in the garage where I could continue my woodworking. Jason, after much deliberation, agreed to accept my help with a modest 1-bedroom apartment just 10 minutes away. Close enough for regular visits, but providing the independence he needed to fully rebuild his life. As we packed up the family home, we uncovered memories in every drawer and closet. Jason's childhood artwork, Margaret's carefully preserved wedding dress, photo albums documenting 3 decades of shared life. Some items we kept, others we donated, each decision a step in our shared journey of letting go and moving forward. The day before the moving trucks were scheduled to arrive, Jason found me sitting in the empty living room, lost in thought. Having second thoughts? He asked, sitting beside me on the floor. Just saying goodbye, I replied. So many memories in these walls. Good ones. He nodded. Despite everything, they were mostly good ones. Yes, I agreed. They were. We sat in silence for a moment, then Jason turned to face me directly. Dad, I need you to know something. These past 8 months, moving back home, working those terrible jobs, starting over, they have been the most valuable experience of my life. I lost everything I thought mattered only to rediscover what actually does. He took a deep breath. I am so sorry for the years I wasted, for the pain I caused you and Mom. But I am grateful for this second chance. More grateful than I can express. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. Your mother always said you would find your way back to what matters. She never lost faith in you, not for a moment. She was right about so many things, Jason said, his voice catching. I wish I could tell her that now. I think she knows, I replied, surprised to find that I truly believed it. The next day, as we closed the door on the house that had been the center of our family life for so many years, I felt not sadness, but a curious sense of rightness. Margaret was gone, but her wisdom and love continued to guide us. The family home would soon belong to new owners, but the true meaning of home, the connections between people who love each other despite flaws and failures, would continue in our new arrangement. 2 weeks after the move, Jason invited me to dinner at his new apartment. He had prepared Margaret's famous pot roast following her recipe with painstaking care. As we ate, he shared news of a promising interview for a software development position at a small local company. Not as prestigious as his former career, but solid work with ethical people. It feels like a new beginning, he said, refilling my water glass. One I never expected, but now cannot imagine living without. I thought of Margaret then, of her unwavering belief in the healing power of family, of her final request that I take care of our boy and find happiness again. Looking at my son across the table, humbled by experience, strengthened by adversity, reclaiming the values that truly mattered, I knew we were both on the path to fulfilling her wishes. The journey had been painful beyond words, filled with loss and betrayal and grief. But as Margaret had often reminded me during difficult times, sometimes we need to be broken open to let the light in. Jason's choices had broken our family apart, but through that breaking, we had found a new kind of wholeness, one built on deeper understanding, hard-won wisdom, and the kind of love that endures even when tested by fire. Would you give someone a second chance after they chose something trivial over one of life's most important moments? Has someone in your life ever disappointed you deeply, but then genuinely changed? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about healing, forgiveness, and finding your way back to what truly matters. Thank you for listening, and remember, it is never too late to rebuild what matters most.